What if I told you that one of the most powerful men in the world, someone who could live in a palace, wear golden robes, and be chauffeured in a bulletproof limousine, chose to live in a modest apartment, cook his own meals, and wear old shoes? This isn't fiction. This is the real story of Pope Francis. In a world that constantly tells us more is better, more money, more stuff, more status, his choice feels like a radical act of rebellion. But why would someone with so much willingly choose so little? Maybe he knows something we don't. Have you ever felt tired of the race, the endless scrolling, the pressure to prove your worth through what you own or how you look? Deep down, most of us crave something else. Peace, clarity, freedom. And that's exactly what this video is about. Today, we'll uncover the powerful philosophy behind Pope Francis's way of life and how it connects deeply with Stoicism, the ancient wisdom that teaches us to find strength not in abundance, but in simplicity. Stick around, because this might just change the way you look at success, happiness, and what truly matters. Let's begin the heart of this story. Part 1. A lifestyle that defied expectations. Imagine this. You've just been chosen as the spiritual leader of over 1 billion people. You now hold the keys to the Vatican, the symbolic and literal heart of global Catholicism. You're offered residence in a centuries-old apostolic palace filled with chandeliers, marble columns, and gold-trimmed walls. Most people would take a moment to soak it in and then say yes. But Pope Francis didn't. Instead of moving into the apostolic palace, he made a surprising decision. He chose to live in a modest guest house called Domus Sanctae Marthae. No butlers, no private chefs, no red carpets, just a small apartment, simple furniture, and a life that looked, on the outside, very ordinary. To many, this looked like humility, but to those paying closer attention, it was something deeper, a philosophy in action. Because simplicity isn't just about doing less, it's about choosing less when you could easily have more. Why this matters? Now let's pause for a second. Why would a man with every luxury at his fingertips say no? Was he trying to make a statement? Possibly. Was it some act of false modesty? Doubtful. No. This choice wasn't about theatrics. It was about alignment between his values and his way of life. You see, Pope Francis had spent years working closely with the poor in Argentina. He walked through slums, he sat with families who had nothing. He knew what real hardship looked like. And he also knew how the pursuit of excess can quietly rob us of our peace. So when he became Pope, he didn't abandon those values. He amplified them, what it looked like in daily life. And it wasn't just about where he slept. His simplicity was everywhere. He ditched the limousine for a modest Ford Focus. He often eats in the common dining room with staff. He kept wearing the same old black shoes he'd always worn in Buenos Aires. And when asked about it, he simply said, "My people are poor. Why should I live like a king?" Can you imagine the strength it takes to walk into an empire and then choose not to wear the crown? Why this is revolutionary, even if it looks small. We live in a time where more is more. Bigger houses, flashier cars, designer labels. People take Instagram photos next to private jets they don't even own just to feel validated for a few seconds. And yet here's one of the most recognizable figures in the world, stepping away from all of it. And here's the truth. That's not weakness. That's freedom. The kind of freedom Stoic philosophers like Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius spoke about centuries ago. The Stoic lens: less noise, more clarity. Stoicism teaches us that happiness doesn't come from external things, it comes from how we respond to them. You might remember the quote from Epictetus: "Wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants." That's exactly what Pope Francis embodies. He isn't rejecting comfort out of guilt, he's choosing clarity over clutter, and that's something we can all learn from. How this applies to you and me. Now maybe you're thinking, that's great for a pope, but I live in the real world. I've got bills, kids, a job, I can't just unplug. And you're right. Living simply isn't about quitting your life. It's about questioning the parts of it that don't actually serve you. Let me ask you this. When was the last time you bought something you didn't really need just to feel better for a few minutes? How often do you scroll through social media not because it inspires you, but because you're trying to fill some empty space? Simplicity, in this sense, isn't about restriction. It's about reclaiming your attention. It's about asking, what truly brings me peace? A real example, the power of saying no. I know someone, a friend of mine, who recently turned down a high-paying job offer. The title was impressive, the salary nearly double, but something didn't feel right. He realized that the job would consume his evenings, take him away from his kids, and pull him into a world of meetings and politics he didn't want. So he said no. Everyone around him thought he was crazy. But a few months later, he told me something I'll never forget. I didn't lose anything. I just stopped pretending I needed what I didn't even want. That's what Pope Francis shows us too. Living simply isn't passive, it's powerful. Let's be honest. Choosing less in a world that worships more is hard, but it's also a statement, a quiet rebellion that says, I know what I need, and I refuse to let the world decide it for me. And when you live like that, whether you're a pope, a parent, a student, or an artist, you walk lighter. Not because life is always easy, but because your load is no longer filled with things that don't matter. And that is the power of simplicity. Stay with me, because in part 2 we'll dive even deeper into how Stoicism teaches us not only to live simply, but to master our desires from the inside out. Part 2, the Stoic secret, freedom from the need for more. Let's continue the journey. In the last part, we explored how Pope Francis didn't just say he valued simplicity, he lived it. But now let's go deeper. Let's look at the why behind that choice. Because this wasn't just a personal preference, it was philosophical. And that philosophy is Stoicism. What is Stoicism really? Stoicism isn't about being cold or emotionless, it's about clarity. It's about focusing only on what you can control and letting go of what you can't. And one of the biggest things Stoicism warns us about is desire. Not desire for meaning or connection, but excessive, endless, never satisfied wanting. You know the feeling. You buy a new phone, and within weeks it feels old. You scroll through social media, and suddenly your life doesn't feel good enough. You get that promotion, and instead of peace, you feel pressure to chase the next one. The Stoics called this the hedonic treadmill, running endlessly toward a finish line that keeps moving. And Pope Francis, he simply stepped off the treadmill. Desire doesn't make you free. It makes you a slave. There's a quote from Epictetus that hits hard. It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor. That's worth reading again, because we're told the opposite every day. We're told that more stuff, more success, more admiration will finally make us feel whole. But here's the punchline. When you let your happiness depend on external things, what you wear, where you live, what car you drive, you've handed your freedom over to the world. You've become a puppet, pulled by invisible strings, trends, ads, comparisons, expectations. And this is where Pope Francis made a bold move. He cut the strings. How that looks in real life, he could have dressed in golden robes. He could have bathed in applause, let photographers capture every luxurious detail of papal life. But instead, he chose plain white garments. He smiled humbly and greeted janitors before heads of state. He rode in a beat-up car because, in his words, it gets me there just the same. Now, imagine bringing that mindset into your own life. What if you chose clothes because they were comfortable and useful, not because they impressed anyone? What if you drove a car that worked, not one that fed your ego? What if your job wasn't your identity, but simply a means to support the life you care about? Suddenly, your mind clears. Your attention shifts from status to substance. That's the Stoic way. The modern prison, image over integrity. Let's be real for a moment. We live in a culture where appearance is everything. where people go into debt to project an image, where people lease cars, wear brands, and chase lifestyles not because they love them, but because they're afraid to be seen without them. That's not freedom. That's anxiety in designer packaging. And here's where Stoicism and Pope Francis offer something revolutionary. A reminder that you don't need to prove your worth to anyone. You are already worthy, without the filters, without the flex. How to practice this? One small shift. Let's make this practical. Ask yourself this one question. What am I chasing, and why? Is it really for you, or is it for validation you think you need? You can try this exercise. Open your closet. Remove one item that you keep only to impress others. Next time you buy something, pause and ask, does this bring real value or just a momentary thrill? Journal about a moment when you felt free. What were you doing? What weren't you chasing? The point isn't to throw your stuff away. It's to reclaim ownership over your desires. Real example, breaking the loop. A friend of mine used to upgrade his phone every year. It wasn't about the features, it was about being first, being admired. One day he dropped his latest model, the screen shattered. He panicked, not because he couldn't use the phone, but because he felt embarrassed, like he'd lost social currency. That moment woke him up. He realized, if a cracked screen makes me feel unworthy, maybe I'm chasing the wrong things. So he started slowing down, buying less, listening more, reconnecting with friends not through group photos, but real conversations. His life got quieter, but deeper. That's what simplicity makes possible. Why this isn't about poverty, but power. Now, don't confuse this message. Pope Francis isn't saying money's evil. The Stoics didn't say that either. What they're saying is this. If you let your desires control you, then even if you own everything, you are owned by everything. But if you train your mind, if you develop the ability to say, this is enough, then you become powerful in the deepest sense. Your life, your compass. Here's the thing. No one's going to live your life for you. No one's going to hand you peace, contentment, or meaning. That's your work, your walk, your wisdom to gain. But what Pope Francis and the Stoics give us is a compass, a way to look inward when the world pulls us outward, pulls us out, a way to strip away noise and find what truly matters. So the next time you feel the pull to upgrade, to impress, to accumulate, pause. Take a breath and ask yourself, what am I actually trying to feel right now? Because often, what we really want can't be bought. Stay tuned for part 3, where we'll explore how humility creates connection, and why leading from the heart matters more than leading from a title. We've talked about Pope Francis rejecting luxury. We've explored the Stoic power of wanting less. Now, let's look at something even deeper, something our world is starving for. Connection. Because here's the truth, simplicity isn't just about clearing space in your closet or cutting back on distractions. It's also about clearing space in your heart, so you can truly show up for others. And that's exactly what Pope Francis teaches us, not through theory, but through example. The power of being present. Think about the last time someone truly saw you, not glanced at you while scrolling their phone, not nodded while you were talking, waiting for their turn to speak. I mean, really saw you, listened, cared, made you feel that for a moment. Nothing else mattered but your words. That kind of presence is rare. And it's becoming rarer in a world obsessed with speed and status. But Pope Francis, he made it his priority. He didn't just visit the poor, he sat with them. He didn't just wave from a balcony, he walked into prisons, refugee camps, aid shelters, and kitchens feeding the homeless. And when he showed up, he didn't bring lectures, he brought listening. He brought hands that reached out without gloves. He brought himself, fully. That's humility in action. And that's what builds connection. Status builds walls. Humility builds bridges. Let's be honest. Titles impress, but they also intimidate. Luxury dazzles, but it also creates distance. And that's exactly why so many leaders feel unrelatable. We admire them, but we don't trust them. They seem polished, but somehow empty. Pope Francis flipped that script. By refusing to dress like royalty, he became approachable. By refusing to live like a king, he made room for real relationships. By refusing to lead from a pedestal, he led from the ground, among the people. And isn't that the kind of leadership we all crave? Not someone above us, but someone with us. The Stoic view on leadership and humility. The Stoics would nod in agreement. Marcus Aurelius, who was literally an emperor, wrote in his journal, "A man should be upright, not kept upright." In other words, don't lean on your title, don't rely on your status, be someone of substance. He also reminded himself daily that emperors die just like peasants, that praise fades, that power is temporary. So the question isn't how do others see you, but rather who are you when no one's watching? Pope Francis understood this. He didn't act humble because cameras were rolling. He lived that way when no one was looking. Real story, washing feet in silence. One of the most powerful moments in his papacy happened not at St. Peter's Basilica, but in a prison. On Holy Thursday, instead of celebrating Mass in a grand cathedral, Pope Francis visited a youth detention center. And there, quietly, without spectacle, he bent down and washed the feet of young inmates. Muslim, Christian, atheist, it didn't matter. He knelt, he washed, he looked them in the eyes, no sermon, just presence. And the world watched, stunned. Because in that moment, a man with immense power became a servant. Not in words, but in action. That's connection, and that's the power of living simply. What this means for us now, you might be thinking, okay, I'm not the Pope, I'm not washing feet in prisons. What does this have to do with me? Everything. Because whether you're leading a company, a classroom, a family, or just trying to lead yourself, humility matters. Let me give you a real-life example. A friend of mine works in a high-powered tech firm. He recently became team lead. First thing he did, remove the nameplate on his desk. Why? Because he didn't want his team to feel like they were reporting to him. He wanted them to feel they were building with him. And guess what? Morale improved, people opened up, productivity spiked. Why? Because when ego steps aside, trust steps in. Practical ways to practice humility today. So how do you bring more humility and connection into your life? Here are 3 small shifts that make a big difference. 1. Listen without waiting to speak. Most people listen to respond, not to understand. Try pausing. Let someone finish fully. Ask follow-up questions. Make them feel heard. 2. Serve without being asked. Whether it's taking out the trash, helping a colleague, or checking in on a friend, act without waiting for recognition. Number 3, acknowledge when you don't know. Leaders, parents, teachers, we often feel pressure to have all the answers. But saying, "I'm not sure, let's find out together," builds trust far more than pretending. The paradox of simplicity. It reveals the deepest truths. Here's the paradox. The simpler you live, the more clearly people see who you truly are. No designer masks, no corporate armor, no inflated titles. Just you, your values, your presence, your sincerity, and that is what people remember. Not how much you impressed them, but how deeply you made them feel seen. Pope Francis doesn't need to shout, he whispers through actions. And somehow that echo carries further than any microphone. Final thought for this chapter. So the next time you feel the urge to prove yourself, pause. Ask, am I trying to look important or trying to be useful? Am I seeking attention or offering presence? Because in a loud world, humility speaks volumes. And in a lonely world, your simplicity might just be the bridge someone was hoping to find. In part 4, we'll go even deeper into why living simply doesn't mean sacrificing joy, but finding a richer kind of happiness that can't be bought. Welcome back. So far, we've seen how Pope Francis lives simply. We've explored the Stoic idea of desiring less. We've talked about how humility opens the door to real human connection. But now it's time to address a big misunderstanding, one that might be lingering in the back of your mind. Maybe you've been thinking, okay, I get it, simplicity is meaningful, but doesn't that mean giving up joy? Let's clear that up right now. Because simplicity isn't about deprivation, It's not about being dull or rigid or constantly saying no. In fact, it's the opposite. True simplicity is about rediscovering a deeper kind of joy, one that doesn't fade the moment a trend changes or the applause stops. Redefining happiness, the Pope's way. Let's start with the example we've been following. Pope Francis laughs often, he smiles easily, he tells jokes, he enjoys meals with others, he hugs strangers. He's not walking around gloomy with a dark cloud of sacrifice over his head. No, he radiates something many people are missing today. Lightness. That's because when you stop chasing everything, you finally have time to enjoy something. When you stop trying to impress, you make space for authentic joy. The Stoic perspective on joy. The Stoics had a word for this kind of happiness, eudaimonia. It doesn't mean pleasure or excitement or thrill. It means flourishing, living in alignment with your values, feeling steady, fulfilled, and free, not because things are perfect, but because you are anchored. Seneca said it beautifully. It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, that is poor. And Epictetus reminded us, freedom is not achieved by satisfying desire, but by eliminating it. When you stop needing your joy to come from things, you realize joy was already there, you just had to make room. Example, the coffee you never tasted. Let me give you a modern example. Imagine someone who starts every morning in a rush. They grab a $7 coffee, sip it distractedly while scrolling through emails, and before the first sip is even over, they're thinking about 3 other things. Now imagine someone else. They sit down with a simple cup of black coffee. No rush, no phone. They breathe. They notice the warmth in their hands, the smell of the beans, the stillness of the moment. Who do you think enjoys their coffee more? It's not about what you have. It's about how you engage with it. That's the essence of simple joy. And that's something Pope Francis and the Stoics invite us to reclaim. Joy hidden in plain sight. There's a story about Pope Francis that captures this perfectly. One evening, he slipped out of the Vatican without the usual convoy of security and attention and went to a local shelter. He didn't announce his visit. He didn't bring media. He just wanted to sit with the people. He shared food. He listened to stories. He laughed, he offered blessings quietly, and when someone asked him later why he went, he said simply, "I wanted to be among them, not above them. No cameras, no script, just real human joy, found in presence, not performance." What this means for you. So how do we bring this home? How do you practice joy through simplicity without giving everything up and moving into a monastery? Here are a few ideas. 1. Subtract, don't add. Instead of buying something new to feel better, remove something that's cluttering your mind. Maybe it's an app, maybe it's an obligation, maybe it's a habit that keeps you busy but never fulfilled. 2. Do one thing slowly. Eat a meal without TV or scrolling. Go for a walk without headphones. Write a handwritten letter. Watch how your mind resists at first and then relaxes into stillness. 3. Notice joy in small things. A breeze, a warm shower, a shared laugh, a quiet moment with someone you love. These are the things that don't need upgrades. They just need attention. Real story, the simple morning that changed everything. A friend of mine once told me how overwhelmed he felt, always chasing new goals, always busy. One morning, his daughter, age 4, asked, "Daddy, can you just sit with me and drink tea today?" He almost said no, but he paused and said yes. They sat on the floor with plastic cups and warm water. No phones, no agenda, just quiet company. He told me later that was the most peaceful moment I'd had in months, and it cost nothing. That's the magic of simplicity. It slows you down just enough to let joy catch up. The joy you don't have to chase. We live in a culture that screams, do more, be more, get more. But maybe the real question isn't what's missing. Maybe it's, what joy have I been too busy to notice? Pope Francis reminds us that joy isn't loud, it doesn't always sparkle. It often waits quietly in the spaces we overlook. And Stoicism reminds us that when you strip away what you don't need, what remains is something pure, something real, something lasting. Final thought for this chapter. So if you feel tired of the noise, tired of the pressure, tired of pretending that more is always better, you're not alone. And you don't need a dramatic lifestyle overhaul. You just need to slow down, pay attention, and give yourself permission to find joy where you already are. Not in the next thing. Not in the perfect version of your life, but here, now. Because maybe, just maybe, less really is more. Coming up in part 5, we'll explore how living simply creates space for deeper meaning and how you can redefine success on your own terms. Welcome to part 5. At this point in our journey, we've seen how Pope Francis embodies simplicity, not just as a lifestyle, but as a message. We've looked at the Stoic wisdom behind wanting less, the quiet strength of humility, and the overlooked joy hidden in simple moments. Now let's talk about something many of us struggle with silently: success. Or more specifically, what does success actually mean? Because in today's world, the definition has become painfully narrow. Success is often measured by titles, wealth, likes, followers, and external validation. But what if those metrics are broken? What if chasing applause has actually distracted us from discovering real purpose? This part of the story might just help you rewrite your own definition of success. The Pope's definition of greatness. Let's go back to Pope Francis for a moment. He holds one of the most globally recognized positions on earth. He could easily be the face of prestige, ceremony, and status. But when asked how he wants to be remembered, his answer was simple. As someone who tried to do good, not the most important pope, not a reformer, a diplomat, or a spiritual giant, just someone who tried to live meaningfully aligned with his values. That right there is a radical redefinition of success, because it shifts the focus from how big your life looks to how true your life feels. The Stoic mirror, fame versus integrity. The Stoics too warned against being seduced by applause. Marcus Aurelius, an emperor with unmatched power, once wrote, "Ambition means tying your well-being to what other people say or do. Sanity means tying it to your own actions." Think about that. If your sense of worth rises and falls based on how others see you, you've handed your peace over to public opinion. But if your goal is simply to live with integrity, to do the right thing even when no one is watching, you've built a foundation no storm can shake. This is exactly what Pope Francis models. He doesn't lead to impress, he leads to serve. He doesn't act for the camera, he acts for conscience. A real-world example, redefining the dream job. A former student of mine once landed what he called his dream job at a top consulting firm. 6 figures, high-rise office, prestige. He had made it, at least on paper, but after 6 months he was drained, burned out, disconnected from his family, haunted by a constant sense that something was missing. Eventually he walked away, took a huge pay cut, started working for a small nonprofit focused on climate education. He said, "I stopped chasing a life that looked good and started building one that felt good." Now he makes less, but smiles more. He feels useful. He's present. Alive. That's what happens when we stop chasing performance and start living with purpose. Success isn't a trophy, it's a state of being. Let's get real for a second. We've all had moments where we achieved something, only to feel nothing. You finally got that job, that car, that recognition, and 5 minutes later you're wondering, okay, what's next? Why does that happen? Because the goal was external, but the hole was internal. No amount of applause can fill a soul that's hungry for meaning. But when you live simply, when you strip away distraction, something beautiful happens. You start noticing the right things, the smile of someone you helped, the peace of a quiet evening, the satisfaction of finishing what you said you would. And that, my friend, is success. It's just not the kind that gets headlines. Simple practices to redefine your own success. So how can you shift the way you view success in your life, starting today? Here are 3 powerful but simple practices. 1. Track impact, not approval. Each evening, ask yourself, did I make someone's life better today? Not how many people liked me, but who felt seen, heard, or helped because of you. 2. Celebrate small wins. You finished a task. You showed up honestly. You kept your word. These are quiet victories, but they build your character brick by brick. 3. Define your own metrics. What do you want to be known for? Patience, creativity, courage. Write it down. Let that be your compass, not someone else's yardstick. From applause to alignment. Here's the paradox. The more you chase applause, the emptier you feel. But the more you live in alignment with your values, the more fulfilled you become, even if no one's clapping. Pope Francis never set out to be a celebrity. He chose meaning. He chose humility. He chose truth. And that's why the world listens. Because authenticity doesn't need a spotlight. It shines on its own. Final thought for this series. So here we are. You don't need to be a pope to live with depth. You don't need to renounce the world to reclaim your center. You just need to be willing to ask the hard questions. What truly matters to me? What am I building? And will it still matter when the noise fades? Pope Francis and the Stoics invite us to shift the question from, how do I get more, to how do I become more of who I'm meant to be? And the answer often begins with less. Less clutter, less ego, less pretending. And in that quiet space, something amazing emerges. A life not driven by image, but anchored in meaning. A success not shouted, but felt deeply, honestly, and peacefully. Thank you for walking this journey with me. If this series spoke to you, hit like, leave a comment below sharing your own definition of success, and subscribe for more stories that reconnect us with what matters most. Let's keep choosing depth over noise, meaning over metrics, and simplicity over spectacle, because maybe, just maybe, the simplest life is the most profound one of all. So here we are at the end of this journey, but maybe at the beginning of a more meaningful one for you. We've explored how Pope Francis chose simplicity not as sacrifice, but as strength. We saw how his life mirrors the timeless wisdom of Stoicism, reminding us that peace, clarity, and joy don't come from having more, but from needing less. And maybe somewhere along the way, a small question began to rise in you too. What would my life feel like if I let go of what I don't need and return to what truly matters? The truth is, you don't need to be a pope to live simply. You don't need to renounce everything to find freedom. You just need to pause, to reflect, to choose, consciously. Because in a world racing toward more, choosing less is a quiet revolution, and it begins with you. Start with one drawer, 1 hour of silence, one conversation without distraction. Start with noticing the joy you already have before chasing the next thing. Start by remembering, you are not what you own, you are what you value. If this video spoke to something in you, thank you. Thank you for watching, for reflecting, for being here. And if you'd like to walk this path a little further with me, I'd love for you to like this video if it brought you clarity, leave a comment sharing what simplicity means to you, and subscribe if you'd like more stories that help us slow down, go deeper, and reconnect with what truly matters. Let's keep the conversation going, because the world doesn't need more noise. It needs more people who live with intention. And that person can be you.